Hello. Our guest in the chair today is Dr Rob MacFarlane, who's the Assistant Director in the Civil Contingency Secretariat at the Cabinet Office. But he also chairs the British Standards Institute's Technical Committee in the field of emergency management. And Rob is here to tell us today about a new piece of work produced by his committee, the new British Standard BS 11200, which is all about crisis management. Why did you think it was right to bring it out now, Rob?
Okay. Well, the roots of the standard do go back a few years. These things don't just appear overnight. But in terms of in terms of the interest in it, well, as I was driving here this morning, I lost count of the number of times I heard the word crisis on the radio. They were talking about a number of specific ongoing emergencies, but the word crisis came up, a number of times. It's quite an emotive term. Some organisations, in actual fact, don't like to talk about the term. It's all rather beneath the radar. So the reason that government got involved in this a number of years ago in establishing the precursor to what was the British Standard, which was published in 2011, was because we have got a very clear interest in the resilience of organisations in this country. Large, small, public, private, voluntary sector, the whole spectrum of organisations which are really meshed together in support of the big strategic objectives of national security.
But isn't there plenty of advice out there already for organisations?
Well, that's a very good point. There's a lot of books around crisis management, a lot of academic tomes around crisis management, a lot of quite sort of homespun wisdom. It's the party. The start of the party is no time to learn the dance steps and things like that. Which in a sense we didn't have any difficulty with, but there was no one clear, consistent point coming together of all of this good practice. One of the characteristics of the academic literature is it didn't agree with itself. A book would come out that said one thing and had certain concepts and definitions. That's rather it does. That's actually really quite a confusing place for practitioners and policymakers to be. So we wanted to establish an authoritative single point of reference which defined the core concepts, established some clear principles, and set out some very clear, useful, actionable guidance for organisations.
And this guidance is based on recent, relevant experience.
Absolutely. The way that standards are developed is they're not just cooked up by a couple of people. Cabinet Office, I chaired the process, and we did sponsor the document which ultimately led into British Standard, but it's not a government piece of guidance. You have a committee of people. I think there are around 25 people in this committee, and they reflected the kinds of organisations that we thought would ultimately be of interest to this. Yes, there are Category 1, Category 2, critical national infrastructure providers, people from the banking, the retail sector, the big four consultancies, small consultancies, educational establishments as well. So real diversity. And what you've got in there, without wishing to be overly dramatic about it, is literally hundreds of years worth of collective experience of dealing with crises, but also thinking about crises, and that's where the academic component came in. So it's a group that never entirely agreed with itself, but it's a group that really positively aired a lot of the issues and ultimately reached consensus. As I said, core concepts, principles, and some good, solid, useful guidance on managing crises.
Well, you said some of this experience goes back hundreds of years. Yeah, I mean, this has, in order for it to be relevant and useful, this has to be based upon the experience we've gained in the last, well, I guess 5 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My point about hundreds of years was really sort of the collective expertise of the committee, really. You're absolutely right that the past 5 years have been relatively eventful in many respects. Certainly, in addition to hearing the word crisis a number of times, I heard the word COBRA referring to the government's emergency committee a number of times, and there aren't that many days. Or certainly weeks these years, where it's not there on the news. So absolutely, there's a lot of crises about, but there's something of a similarity that if you actually extract out the essence of what constitutes a crisis, whether you're in the banking sector, the retail sector, the oil production sector, or in government, then there are certain core similarities. There are certain things that organisations can do to get better at managing crises, and that's what we sought to home in on.
Is this the government telling people how they should prepare and manage for crises, or is it simply advisory?
it's not a government publication, so in that respect British standards are independent of government. The fact that I, as Cabinet Office representative, chaired it, my job was to reach the consensus of that very diverse group. So no, it's not government guidance, but there's a very clear strength in that's actually generated from that body, that pool of expertise that I referred to recently, and that's quite a unique and very, very positive feature of British standards as distinct to HM government guidance.
But it is guidance. It's not instruction. It's not a legal requirement.
No, and that's a very important point for anyone who's looking at this or thinking about investing in it, to understand. But broadly speaking, there's two different kinds of standards. One's called a prescriptive standard. One's called a specification standard, and that really defines what you have to do and how. It's quite detailed. It's quite very prescriptive. It's an example of that would be BS 25999 of a number of years ago in business continuity. This is different. It's called a good practice standard. It's indicative, not prescriptive, and it defines what good practice looks like and how an organisation may pursue that. I think one of the key or absolutely core to the standard is the idea of capability. And capability, as we defined it, I'm playing around with the word slightly here, is a demonstrable ability to do something under specified circumstances. And that's something here, is to be able to manage a crisis. So if we walk that back slightly, then a crisis is something, it's not trivial, it's not every day, and critically it's not something you have a very clear plan for, because they're ambiguous, they're uncertain, and they're very strategically significant. They will affect your objectives, your reputation. They might even finish you as an organisation if you're not really on top of it. So that really clearly establishes a crisis as something that's strategically significant. What we really elaborate in the standard is the kinds of capabilities that organisations need to have. And that works really in two ways. One, it defines the kinds of capabilities around information management, developing situational awareness, for example. Things that organisations need to be on top of. We don't tell them how to do it. So the second part of it is it's really a framework or a mirror for an organisation to hold up to itself and say, right, to be good at this, I've got to be on top of the following things.
There may be some organisations, of course, who would like more direction, who would like to be told sometimes, this is what you have to do.
Absolutely. I think you can't please all the people all the time. We took a very clear view that a capability-based approach, rather than a manual, was the right place to go. And the strength of our feeling about that derived from all organisations are different. They operate in different contexts, with different risk profiles, with different risk appetites, with different cultures. They're profoundly different. A one-size-fits-all manual, follow that. It really wouldn't work.
And you've already said that this is not just for Cat 1 and Cat 2 responders. This is for a much broader audience.
Absolutely. We don't define who it is for and who it is not for. It is absolutely of very clear relevance, we would say, for Category 1 and Category 2 responders, and it is consistent with the government-issued guidance, emergency preparedness, emergency response and recovery, that they will, of course, be following. But it's the broader critical national infrastructure, essential services, small to medium-sized enterprises, and all of those organisations and those networks are bound together ultimately in support of national security. So we see this as being of relevance to organisations of all sectors, sizes, types and services.
So what action do you expect people to take if they go out and spend 200 quid on a copy of this? Is it simply a question, you've talked about holding up the mirror, presumably this is simply a question of sitting down and looking at the guidance that's offered and then reviewing your own plans, the plans that you have in place against this guidance, to see whether or not you can improve what you're currently doing in terms of preparation?
Absolutely. I think you're quite specific in identifying plans. I go back to my slightly earlier point about capabilities. Yeah. A plan, your ability to establish a plan that is relevant, that's flexible, that's scalable, that is adaptable, is one of the key components, one of the key capabilities of crisis management. So what do we expect them to do? Well, we recommend it. We think it is relevant to a very broad sector of organisations. We dearly like them to reflect on it. But I think one of the really key dimensions, the qualities that our experience suggested makes organisations that are good at crisis management is not in the hard procedural framework, structure, call-out lists kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong, they're critically important, absolutely so, but it's the softer stuff. It's around leadership, it's around the degree to which the values of an organisation are actually felt and adhered to across the whole organisation, because it is the soft factors which actually make an organisation coherent in time of crisis. So when there is a very clear defined end state, we are working collectively to achieve this end state. This is what the end of the crisis looks like.
And is it possible to capture
how we work there?
Is it possible to capture good practice in terms of the way other companies or other organisations live their values, and to publish it in a document of this kind?
I think that's something that's really very, very unique to individual organisations. One of the key principles here, as a matter of fact, I'm going to use somebody else's words for this, which is Sue Wassenham, the outgoing president of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, I think, spoke last year at a conference, and she posed a challenge to an organisation of crisis management professionals about this issue. You have value-generating activities, the things you do to keep you in business, and then you've got the values of an organisation, the things that you say are important to you, that are the guiding framework for your value-generating activities. Her challenge was, are your values lived or are they just laminated? Because one of the key things in a crisis, under conditions of great personal as well as collective stress, is maybe you can take the quicker route, you can take a few shortcuts, you can actually start compromising on your values to protect your value generating activity. But when we go back to that point about homespun wisdom, of which there was a lot of it about, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but you can destroy it in just a few minutes. So that conciliation between your values and your value-generating activities is a strategic imperative for an organisation. We can't tell organisations how to do it, but we clearly position it as something that if they don't really pay attention to, then they may be heading into a very difficult and hot water place.
You want to sell this document, you want people to react to it and act on it. Asking you to put your salesman's hat on.
I'm a civil servant, and I chair the BSI Technical Committee. I will absolutely commend it, but beyond that I have no sales function at all. Is there anything new in it? That's an interesting point, actually. Good practice very often is it's almost sort of a sedimentary process that over a period of years, what constitutes good practice emerges from lots of good ideas that might be a bit of a flash in the pan but never really last. So in some respects, I wouldn't want to publish a standard which is full of lots of novel ideas and something a little bit sort of edgy and what have you, because in actual fact that's not good practice. Good practice is something that has matured, it's stood the test of time, it's stood peer review, and it's actionable. You can do something with it, but it's also transferable between organisations. So I think a lot of really sort of novel stuff might work here, but it's not actually very transferable elsewhere. So that's my long-winded way of saying there's not actually a great deal that's new in there, but it's this coming together in clear, useful, and quite concise form. It's when you cut out the sort of the before and after pages, there's around 17, 18 pages of guidance. That's quite short and concise for a standard.
So no surprises. Nothing new, no surprises. But I guess when people pick this document and read it, what they're looking for is reassurance on the one hand, but also, as you say, a pooling, a coming together of the best contemporary thinking around crisis management and response.
I'm confident that we have brought together some of the thought leaders and the key practitioners, organisations who have dealt with crises within their own organisations. I'm not going to name individual constituents of the membership committee, but also people from consulting houses who have advised big corporations through extremely testing time. So I'm confident we had a really, really impressive group working on this, and that is reflected in the standard. Coming back to your point about no surprises, I would be, whilst for somebody who I would hope knows the field of crisis management really rather well, there are, to my mind at least, no surprises. But I think one of the jobs the standard is to challenge. So in actual fact, one of the key things that organisations tend to slide into is a little bit of complacency. We're good at this. Mm. We're all over this, we're on top of this. In actual fact, that's a very dangerous place to be. So if the standard in holding up a mirror to an organisation actually encourages them to go, hang on a minute, we're not we don't actually have that capability in a full, true, meaningful sense, it's not demonstrable, it won't stand the pressure and stress of a crisis, then that in a sense is something new. It will stimulate some new thinking, some challenge to organisations. So in the standard, something conceptually new, no, we make no apology for that. But will it encourage people to find new things out about their leadership, about their organisation, about their culture, about their value appetite, about the coherence of all of their activities? I hope so.
Rob MacFarlane, thank you.
Pleasure, thank you.